It is July 20th, 2024, and we are 108 days away from the presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And the RNC just finished, and there has been a lot of events that have been going on in the past week or so, and this definitely has changed the map. So in today's video, we're going to be filling out a new election polling map based on all 50 states, including polls from 538. But before we do that, let's take a look at the updated poly market odds. Right now, Donald Trump has a 64% chance of winning, and Joe Biden is all the way down there at a 7% chance of winning, which is, I think, his lowest ever. Kamala Harris has actually passed him. And the Democratic nominee percentages, Joe Biden only has a 26% chance of being the nominee, where he has a 78% chance of dropping out before the presidential election. But now we're going to be looking at the polling. First, in the national polls, Donald Trump has been leading by 3.2%, which is an increase from 2%, which is before the attempt on last Saturday and before the RNC. So we can see here after all those events had unfolded, Donald Trump has been gaining consistently, a pretty large bump to say the least, and all the previous polls that have been added had Trump up by a considerable amount. Even the Democratic partisan leaning polls have had Trump up by 4, and this one over here has him up by 6 and 5. So this is definitely spelling trouble for Joe Biden. This is why it says only here that he has a 7% chance of even winning the election. But right now we're going to be heading onto this map, and we're going to be filling out all 50 states based on the polls. We're going to be going in alphabetical order this time, starting with the state of Alabama, which is always going to be considered safe for Donald Trump. And after moving on to the state of Alaska, which is also going to be safe for Trump. Moving down to our first swing state, the state of Arizona, which doesn't really seem too much a swing state this time around because Donald Trump is leading by 5.6%, which is going to be barely in that lean column. Almost likely, but not quite. Moving on to some safer states, Donald Trump will be winning in the state of Arkansas by a safe amount. In the state of California, Joe Biden will be winning by 20 percentage points, which is down 10% from his 30-point win last time around in 2020. In Colorado, even though it is going to be closer, I expect still, and the polls expect Joe Biden to win this state by a likely margin. So it will be going in that range. The state of Connecticut will be going in that safe margin. However, there have been polls that have been showing it right on that border. Still, however, it's going to be going into that barely safe margin. The state of Delaware, there has not really been any polls released, but it is going to be most likely going into that safe margin as well. The District of Columbia is going to be safe without a doubt, the most democratic district in all of the country. The state of Florida, once considered a more safe state, now is likely Trump state, where he leads by 8.6 percentage points. This state will be going into that likely column. The state of Georgia will almost be following the same pattern. It is short by 0.1%. It will be going into that lean column, very close to being likely. Remember, this is the state where Joe Biden had actually won by the closest amount out of every state. So Donald Trump leading by, outside even the margin of error spells trouble for Joe Biden, especially in these southern states. But next, a very safe Joe Biden state, but a lot closer this time around, according to the polls, will be the state of Hawaii. It will barely be going into that safe column still. Moving on to a few more safer states, the state of Idaho is going to be safe for Donald Trump, as well as the state of Illinois for Joe Biden. However, it is also going to be a state that is going to be closer than expected. Still, he leads by barely a safe margin, just over that 12-point margin in the state of Illinois. In the state of Indiana, Donald Trump will be winning by a very comfortable margin. Also in the state of Iowa, once considered a safe state that Donald Trump solidified in 2016 and 2020, it will be following a similar pattern and voting for him this time around by a safe margin according to those same polls. The states of Kansas, the state of Kentucky, and the state of Louisiana will all be going into that safe column. So Kentucky, Louisiana, and Kansas all will be going into that safe column for Donald Trump. After those three states, we're going to be having the state of Maine, which has been very close this time around, but the polls do even out to a barely tilt Trump win. And this is very surprising. Joe Biden won this state by 9 percentage points in 2020, so it's a huge swing if it actually unfolds. The first district will be safe Democrat, and the second district will be safe Republican. After the state of Maine, we're going to be moving down to a few a couple safe Democrat states, including the state of Maryland and Massachusetts. Both will be comfortable in that safe margin and will not be competitive at all. These are some of the most Democratic states. But now moving on to a swing state, the state of Michigan, which actually now was very, very close. But after the debate and after the attempt on Trump's life and the RNC, we can see that Donald Trump has a 2.2 percentage point lead, which puts this in the lean column, not the tilt column. The state of Minnesota will also be very close, and it is actually even. So it will be going into that toss-up column on this map right here. Minnesota will be going into that toss-up column. Next up in the state of Mississippi, Missouri, and Montana. These are all safe states, will not be competitive at all. Donald Trump has been leading every poll by a safe margin, and he is going to win all by over 12 percentage points. So the states of Mississippi, Missouri, and Montana will all be going into this column. Right now, Trump has 156, Joe Biden has 122. And next, moving on to the next state on this map will be the state of Nebraska, which also will be a safe state. However, Nebraska splits their districts differently, like the state of Maine. And in total, the Maine, Nebraska at large will be safe for Trump. The 1st district and the 3rd district will be also safe for Trump. And we go to the 2nd district over here, we can see it is pretty close. All in all, though, Donald Trump does have a tilt margin in this race. Joe Biden won the district by around 6 percentage points in the 2020 election, and it is going to be very important to see how this district ends up voting in this election cycle. But moving on past the state of Nebraska to another very competitive state that also is outside of the margin of error for this election. Donald Trump is up by 5.7 percentage points, which is also very close to being likely, but not quite. Moving on to the state of New Hampshire, previously considered a pretty safe state for the Democrats. Joe Biden ended up winning it by around 7 percentage points. This time around, it is a lot closer. The most recent polls have been tightening. The most recent one does have Trump up by 2, but we have to even them all up. This state's going to be going into that tilt column for Joe Biden. Moving on now to the state of New Jersey, a state that should also be extremely safe, but the polls say otherwise. The latest poll actually has Trump up by 1. And the other two have Biden up by only lean margins. In total, the state will be going into that lean margin for Joe Biden. It will be on that 2 to 3 point range for him, according to these polls. It's very surprising. And the state of New Mexico, also we see a tightening in the polls. Joe Biden won this state by around 10 percentage points. This time around, the polls on 538 show it at a lean race, which is close to what I expect because of those Hispanic trends. The state of New York, which they do have an aggregate for, has Joe Biden only up by 9 percentage points. That is a likely margin. Let's remember, Joe Biden won this state by 23 percentage points in the last election, so it is very surprising. But before we continue on this video, please like this video, subscribe, and comment down all your suggestions in the section below. I appreciate all the feedback I receive for all my videos. But now moving on to the state of North Carolina, a state that Republicans have been winning very narrowly since their loss in the 2008 election. This time around, it shows Donald Trump with a likely margin lead. He leads by 6.9 percentage points, which will put that firmly in the likely column. Moving on to a safe Republican state, the state of North Dakota. This will not be close at all. Donald Trump will win this state by a safe margin. The state of Ohio will also be going into that likely column for Donald Trump. It is a state that he won by around 8 to 9 percentage points in both elections. And this time around, they expect him to expand that lead. Some of these polls have him up even by a safe amount. Moving on now to the state of Oklahoma, which will be another safe Republican state, one of the most Republican states in the country. And then another Democrat state, not as Democratic as previously thought. However, this state has a tendency to not be as Democrat as some of these other states. On this map, it will be going into that likely column right on that border. Some of these polls do have it under that 12-point margin, so it'll be going into that likely column. Moving on now to one of the most crucial states in this election, it will be the state of Pennsylvania, which has the highest chance of being the tipping point state. And right now, Trump leads by 4.4%, which is pretty amazing and astounding considering how important this state is to the election. If Trump wins Pennsylvania and Georgia, he wins the election. And since right now he's leading both by outside of that margin of error, we can see why Joe Biden's odds are only at 7 percentage points. But moving on now to the state of Rhode Island, there isn't much polling to out of here, but it is going to be going into that safe column for Joe Biden. Past the state of Rhode Island, we have a couple safe Republican states. First of all, the state of South Carolina is going to be safe for Donald Trump. The state of South Dakota is also going to be safe for Donald Trump. And finally, the state of Tennessee, also a very, very safe state for the Republican Donald Trump. And now to the state of Texas, which will be considered a likely state for Donald Trump. He had won the state by 5 percentage points last time around, and it is being seen as a state that has been trending left, but it seems now that Donald Trump has been leading by a considerable amount this cycle. He is up by 8.2%. This state will be going into that likely column, as well as the states of Florida and North Carolina. So we see a trend here among states that Donald Trump won narrowly in 2020 that are going in that likely column for him. And Donald Trump has eclipsed 270 electoral votes, and we're not even done with all the states yet. We'll go to the state of Utah, which is going to be a safe state for Donald Trump. And then we're going to go after to the state of Vermont, which is going to be a safe state for Joe Biden, one of the most liberal states in the country, so no surprise there. Moving on to a state that Joe Biden won by 10 percentage points and is very left trending, but this time around shows a very, very close race. Joe Biden only leads by 1.5 percentage points, which will be going into that into that tilt column for Joe Biden. The state of Washington will be a safe state for Joe Biden. No surprises there. However, polls expected to be a little bit closer. West Virginia, no surprise here, is going to be in that safe column, as well as in the state of Wyoming. And then finally, the state of Wisconsin, a very swing state, very important state. Donald Trump right now is actually up also by a lean margin. He is up by 2.4%. And that is going to be our map over here. We see Trump at 315, Joe Biden at 213. All of the states previously, I made a polling map on. These three states were considered, closer to being toss-up states. But this time around, it seems that Donald Trump has been securing the election, has secured the 270 electoral vote threshold without even having to win a state in that tilt column. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe and like this video, share with a friend, and I'll check you guys out in the next one.